Hey, everybody.
映画、文化、政治、クリント・イーストウッドに関するポッドキャスト、Pod Casty For Me へようこそ。アメリカの映画監督クリント・イーストウッドが監督及びまたは主演したすべての映画を鑑賞し、彼らがその瞬間と今回の映画についてどのように語っているかを探ります。
Sorry about that, everybody. This is Pod Casty For Me, the podcast about film culture, politics, and Clint Eastwood, where we watch every film directed by and or starring American filmmaker Clint Eastwood, explore how they speak to their moment. And this one had a little something in my throat there. Made me sound like a computer lady from Japan.
Yeah, I sure did. But you sounded nice.
Podcast is hosted by two guys. I'm one of the guys. My name is Jake Sarwell.
I'm one of the guys. My name is Ian Ryan. How you doing, Jake?
I'm doing okay. I got the famous vaccine, and it turned out that this vaccine had a little bit of, well, let's just say it was like, you've heard of dark matter.
Sure.
This was like dark Pepto. You can imagine the opposite of Pepto-Bismol coursing through me.
If they ever come into contact, it will create some type of
exactly
explosion.
there were a few of those. So I'm feeling all right. I'm feeling clear. You know, I've gone clear.
Great.
In a number of ways.
Michael Pena from last week.
Exactly. Michael Pena. Do we know his Thetan level?
I don't know.
Watching those Ant-Man movies, nobody could be that funny without
must be pretty high.
Thetans. I didn't did you see Ant-Man 3?
Didn't give it a skip. Heard a lot of bad stuff, and
me either.
Largely hopped off the sick train to which we were both strapped.
It looks like vomit. It's just visual vomit. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. I'm actually not sorry, by the way. Fuck those movies.
Yeah.
So
I think it's better for us as
I love
people.
A guest jumping in. We haven't had anyone courageous enough
because you haven't had someone with some actual consistency, a character. They're just like, oh, thanks for inviting me. I'm just happy to be here. Listen, man. Listen, I'm here to play, all right? If we're doing this, let's do it. A little bit, yeah. Come on.
All right, well, let's bring you in officially. Our guest today is filmmaker, film writer, and a Clint freak of admirable proportions, Comrade Yui. Welcome to the show.
I like that. Freak, yes. Let's use that more.
We're all freaks here. How you doing, Yui? What's going on?
I'm good, man. I'm thinking about elves, Just thinking
about elves?
Yeah, a lot of elves lately, yeah.
What kind of elves? What elves are we talking? We talking
like the ones with the pointy ears where you're kind of like, if I touch that, I bet that's kind of sensitive. That's the kind of elf that I'm thinking of.
Oh, yeah. What? So, remind me, a machine elf. This is like one of those DMT things, right?
Yeah, it's like a DMT, high strangeness, like you're merging into other dimensions and talking with these beings, and they want to manipulate you to fucking break down the walls of reality, typical Lovecraftian shit. Yeah, machine elves.
Would love to have some direction in life.
Yeah, but I was going to say, speaking of manipulation, that's an interesting point of entry.
Yourself? Are you is this?
No, I was going to say that this movie and its counterpart are in part about manipulation. Let's before we get into our film today, we're talking Letters from Iwo Jima. I said it in the 90-year-old army guy way. Iwo Jima.
So you guys got yours in the mail, right? Your letters?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. I'm Hanako.
You sure are. Ian, for a long time, Ian has been saying things like, I think I was supposed to be Japanese deep down inside. I feel like I am a Japanese person. Hatsune Miku is sending me coded messages.
There's no video to the podcast. I am in full regalia, and you can interpret that however you wish. It could be modern, old school.
Yeah. One thing is for sure, it's a Queen Amidala costume.
I mean, once he unsheathes the sword, it's not going back in the sheath.
That's right.
That's for damn sure.
So, okay, have you guys seen that 2017 Ghost in the Shell movie? Where literally, the whole fucking plot of that film is that ScarJo is playing a Japanese woman who has her brain inserted into the body of Scarlett Johansson as a robot machine.
I mean,
and it sounds like I'm making it up when I talk about it. I truly am not. I am not making this up.
I did see it. I did find it to be impressively mounted production design wise. It's very bad, but it looks cool, and it seems like a lot of it is practical. That being said, yeah, what the fuck is she doing in that movie? She's also like the. I mean, I'm by no means an expert on Ghost in the Shell, but I've seen the original, and one of the main things about that character is that they are in excess of 4'3" in height. So, like, what is Scarlett Johansson doing? Like, this is sort of a lanky. I went to see a movie at the ArcLight Theater, rest in power, here in Los Angeles, around when Ghost in the Shell was going to come out, and they had some costumes from the film there, and they had like a baby's outfit, and it said Scarlett Johansson's costume from the film, just a tiny person. And so I'm being very progressive and saying, not only was the problem that she's not Japanese, but also that she's too short.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it feels like there's like a thing with her, because do you remember that news a while
the
ago?
rub bug thing? Yeah.
Hold on, I don't know about this.
Oh, nay, you do not.
I've never heard of this. What is this? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to explain it? I mean,
yeah, I'm happy to. There, Scarlett Johansson was attached to a project that was going to be about, I believe, the true story of a trans man who had a classic, Goodfellas style rise and fall with an empire of full contact massage parlors, and Scarlett Johansson was going to play the trans man, and people were like, "Hey, you shouldn't do that." And then she was like, what if I wanted to play a tree, which is the classic kind of I think it was the tree that she said, but the classic kind of flattening where people say, I don't care if you're black, white, yellow, purple, and you're like, well, hold on a second, the experience of black people is not the same as the experience of purple people.
Documentable human.
Not to get back to DMT.
Mm-hmm.
And they're that purple lady people always see or whatever, probably because they've heard about people seeing a purple lady. We're blowing this whole thing wide open. Yui, did I get that right? Was that mostly what happened?
Yeah, as far as I can remember. Yeah, when actors try to do this shit, I gotta say, like, okay, in the 90s, you could get away with that shit. No one cared. There was no one could call you out on it. Like, like the worst you would get is like maybe a mean letter in your mailbox. And now it's like, maybe I should put like a little bit of thought, or like have like just talk to like a PR person, a single one.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, it feels like the resources are available to avoid these mistakes, but they keep happening.
Fabulously wealthy.
Yeah, you do have Ed Skrein, the Game of Thrones guy with the real pointy face, who he was cast as Ben Daimyo in the Hellboy reboot, and then people were like, "Hey, they shouldn't cast him," and he announced that he agreed and stepped down from the role. So shout out to him for doing the very basically decent thing. And then they cast Daniel Dae Kim, who is Korean. But,
well, I think this is
what's important is that movie sucked ass and nobody liked it. So.
It seems like a combination of a Gen X instinct, like you're saying, to sort of say, like, actually, I love all peoples and races so much that I could be any of them, and also an extremely obvious consequence of actor brain, right? Where you're sort of like, actually, the ultimate human empathy is to be able to imagine that you can be any person, and then somebody else saying, hey, maybe you're not fully, like, you don't have the tools to imagine all the things, or also just as an industry, we haven't really given people these opportunities historically, so we can kind of combine those two interests.
Giving roles to Japanese actors and going straight to we've transcended race, so a Game of Thrones guy can play a Japanese character. Yeah.
Right.
Man, funny how that works. It's really convenient when you think about it. Fuck.
Yeah.
How far we've come.
Circle back to white guys can still have most of the roles.
Yeah. Whoa, they have already filmed another Hellboy reboot.
That's not fucking true. You just made that shit up. Shut the fuck up.
Directed by Brian Taylor. Hellboy : The Crooked Man. Oh, it's Taylor without Neveldine. Okay, now I'm interested. Holy shit.
This is real. Are you... Wow.
Hell with Crooked Man. Hey, and they filmed it over there in beautiful Bulgaria.
Wait a second. Hold on. Before I get excited, is this a fucking movie or is it a fucking goddamn streaming original or whatever the hell?
That's
I was
a
about to
great
say
question.
which Netflix star is being transitioned
distributed
over
by
to be the new
Ketchup
Hellboy?
Entertainment. That's real. It's produced by Millennium Media. I mean, I'm sure. No, this is a January movie. This is what I think. I think this is
so. I hope so.
It's got absolutely no one that you've ever heard of. This guy who was on The Strain, Jack Kesey, as Hellboy. He's got a big head. That's all
so
I
can I just say, like, I absolutely will watch this movie, by the way.
Yeah,
I will. Like,
me too.
Just no doubt. Like, January core classic. I mean, I watched the last one because it had Mila Jovovich in it, you know?
Yeah,
so
shout out to Mila. Yeah,
I would say my standards are high, but fuck it, you know?
Wasn't that the one where Selma Blair said that, like, watching someone else playing the same character felt like, I believe she invoked the metaphor of
killed
rape
or something?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which
this is the kind of actor brain stuff I'm talking about.
Well,
this is
because we feel so much. We're so pathetic and I'm so intense in my emotions. No, it's shameful and disgraceful.
It's very shameful. It's very disgraceful. But, you know, this film takes a different tack, which is, what if we can expect Americans to relate on a human level to other human beings? Huge radical position. Before we get into Letters from Iwo Jima, though, we have to do our stupid segment, the 2 questions. Yui, were you able to come up with a question for our little torturous segment here?
Let me just kind of go through my notes. Okay, I did come up with one. I wanted to ask you guys, because I feel like you can like softball bullshit questions from these other people. Again, they're wanting to be nice to you. They're saying, "Oh,
yeah, they're scared of us. They're intimidated.
Let's give these guys an easy time." I'll just kind of, you know, they've been fine, but not really fine though. What do you guys think of the occult, and have you had any experiences thereof?
Oh shit. Okay.
Great. First of all, we do want to clarify: the other people are not softballing us out of any kind of veneration. I think it's more like how you go to a kindergarten and ask people softball questions because you just don't expect much else of them.
Because you're afraid of being mauled by children.
Right. Yep.
It's sort of softball because we're not, like, legally allowed to use a harder ball because of our age and bone density.
But Yui's a lawbreaker. So I will say that I think the occult is cool because its dark powers are kind of self-affirming, right? Even if I don't necessarily believe that magic is as real as some people want to believe, if you just like are interested in alternative thinking and or dark shit, or, you know, being aware of mortality, then guess what? All those things come true as soon as you start being interested in it. So I think that kind of rolls.
See, Ian, and now you will be the one who is spared when the time comes.
I'll say this. In the cold light of day, I think that there is only, you know, the material world, and that most occult stuff seems like alternate explanations for things that we've defined with, you know, scientific instruments or whatever, and that I often get worried by the overlap between the occult thinking and other forms of conspiratorial thinking that always come back to the Jews and stuff like that. But then, when the sun goes down and there's a weird noise in my apartment, I fully believe in everything anyone's ever said to me. So, you know, no atheists in foxholes, no physical materialists in the middle of the night.
In a dark closet having apartment.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, I do find it very fascinating to read about what people have thought is real. I mean, I'm the one who had machine elves rattling around in my head. The concept, not the guys. But so am I gonna get like
your guts are streamers now for the big party?
Yeah,
room.
exactly. I was gonna say, are my fingernails coming off? How did I do on that one?
I mean, it's kind of like you picked the middle path, right?
Yeah.
And no one likes a centrist. So unfortunately, actually, you're not even going to be in the war between us and, you know, the the debunkers, you're just going to be like a casualty, right? And it's going to be kind of like, oh man,
sounds like me.
Yeah, sucks that
My
happened.
lane.
But,
Yeah.
You're something of an occult expert, from what I can tell.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's more like it's literally like a fucking curse sometimes.
Gifts and curse, Spider-Man style.
Yeah. You know, except without the cool like powers, it's mostly just like I have more mental derangements. You know.
Do you have a supernatural nemesis, like a Spider-Man type? Is there a particular entity
like,
that is
like a villain? Like a
Do you have is there a Green Goblin for your personal?
You know, it's not really about that. You know, honestly, it's the more and more you get into like legit occultism, and like I'm being 100% serious here, the more you actually figure out that it, you know, you're basically delving into forms of philosophy that were, you know, discredited by various systems over the course of centuries, and you know, things that have been kind of cast aside in the history of thought, and that stuff, you know, a lot of it usually leads to, in my experience, people who are invested in actually doing the research and, you know, reading these thinkers. A lot of it is like not narrow-minded, like, oh, I'm the dark fanatic and I exist on my own terms. Like a lot of it is more about, you know, educating yourself, like understanding, you know, like you start, you know, fucking doing spells, and then suddenly you're reading about the Neoplatonics and the Gnostics and, you know, all that kind of shit. Like it's nerd shit, right? But I think it is more expansive and more about kind of having a generosity when it comes to the way that people have, you know, related to existence and their theories about, you know, what constitutes reality and how do I relate to that as an individual. You know, a lot of occult stuff and people who are involved in it, it has a very existential flavor, and I think it's used in a similar way that people read, you know, Sartre or Camus or Heidegger or whatever, where they're, you know, they're looking for answers and, you know, they need to find like what particularly works for them and what makes sense to them. And that's how I found it, right? Like I'm like a huge, like as much as, you know, occult or whatever, but like I started with philosophy, and like that's what drew me into occultism. Cause I started looking into things. I'm like, how come, you know, we talk about like Plotinus, but we don't talk about Proclus or whatever, right? And like you kind of learn that, you know, the certain thinkers were, it's like, okay, we're going to put that one back on the shelf and not look into that too hardly. And yeah, it's there's just a lot of instances of that, and thankfully I think nowadays a lot of that stuff, there's less of a stigma around it, and so people, you know, from various walks of life can be like, oh, I can understand, you know, the mystical paths of Buddhism, and it's not like this suppressed, you know, thing where, you know, I'm going to turn into a demon if I do a type of meditation or whatever.
Yeah, I'm a fan of Hegel's Science of Logic, in particular, like non-metaphysical interpretations of it, which...
Oh, see, that's... What the hell? That is the crazy shit I've ever heard. That's more crazy than anything I believe. Holy shit. You were like, you were on a next level with
heterodox.
That.
You're right.
He's quietly one of the most dangerous thinkers on the planet, but just mostly out of like misinterpretation and
bad reading, foolishness.
It's called creative reading, all right?
Yeah. But
gray matter degradation.
I agree with you that one of the things that I like about that, he talks about the necessity of having like a speculative, or I think he even uses the word mystical zone in terms of like how much you believe is unexplored in the world. And I think that actually can translate to very healthy progressive politics, anti-Eurocentric or anti-scientistic politics, because I think what happens is that if you believe you already understand everything, then you can just say, hey, phrenology is right? Or you just do experiments that confirm your existing worldview.
Well, it's a very provincial way of thinking, right? Like, oh man, suddenly it's kind of like the way the teenager thinks, right? Where, man, I just decided that I suddenly know everything, and like it's okay. Well, that's really convenient, I guess.
And then you don't have to challenge any, you know, functional principle or basic virtue or assumptions about the universe. And I think you're right that the occult, in its philosophical origins, is tied up with this idea that there is more to explore, even if I'm not sure that some of the things that people have decided that they know for sure are true. I think it's extremely important to believe that you don't know that everything you know is true.
I mean, I think Los Angeles is either the site of great mystical activity or simply just a place that has attracted a lot of people who think that's happening. You know, there's a long tradition of occultists and weirdos here
What's a
in
hellmouth,
LA.
as we know?
Yeah. I went to one time I got a massage because my back was hurting a lot. And the lady who was the massage therapist said, you know, this spa is located on a plateau of vertices. And this is actually the most powerful vertex. I'm sorry? Are you
back?
good at this, or is
Mm-hmm.
is this just a place where anyone could do a good massage?
Yes, and
yeah, exactly. Yep. And I recently went to the House of Intuition, which is kind of it's down the street from me a little bit, but this is a now fairly famous like local chain of occult stores, and I thought this would be fun. It's in a literal house. You have to climb up a bunch of stairs, not ADA compliant. Also, you know, we're talking about occult spaces as places where people can kind of find new systems of meaning and order and ways of understanding the universe. And I guess these guys also found kind of an alternate zoning to
sure
base their beliefs around. But yeah, it's like a literal house that has like in window air conditioning units, and like you ring the doorbell, but then you go in there and it is just set up like a store, and they have a bunch of, you know, courts, and they had a special tarot deck that was they said it was African tarot, and then they had these candles that were shaped like scissors for use in practices of cutting things out of your life, and it would melt the scissor. So I wonder if being in LA has sort of hardened my heart to this sort of stuff, because I see the annoying kind of narcissist version of this sort of thing all around me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the home of Scientology, right? Like, I mean, who could honestly blame you when it's that, right? But
thank you.
I mean, it's like you look at the origins of Scientology, and like you realize that basically L. Ron Hubbard was a guy who he took real life occult stuff and then was like, okay, what if I made it like dumb and boring and lame, and also mixed it with like pulp science fiction about
the only thing
making
I know
me
about.
rich.
And definitely I'm in charge for sure.
Yeah.
It's funny how people who come up with like new systems of thinking, they always seem to be the main guy, you know? No one ever discovers a new way of conceiving of the world in which someone else is the
it's true.
risen
It's pretty
Christ.
Unusual. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, Yui. Here's my question. Were either of you ever like World War II history dorks, like as children or teenagers with too much access to the History Channel back when they used to show history on it? Were either of you like World War II little Tony Sopranos, you know?
I mean, it depends on what you mean by that. Like, I don't give a shit about, oh, what maneuver happened here, where did the tank go, who did so and so. Like to me, all that stuff is, you know, sure, fine, but I just don't. It's
all those arrows of different colors on the map.
And also like it's the kind of thing that to me it always reminded me of people who build model kits, right? It's like, oh, I have the Zero jet fighter that was used on this date. Like, cool, man. Like put it on your shelf. I would say the most I ever was in terms of like World War II stuff was like I'm a huge fan of like kaiju movies and Godzilla, and like watching that stuff as a kid definitely got me to look into like, you know, the history of like nuclear weapons and like the development behind all that stuff. And so I was always more interested in it in terms of kind of like the way that schools of thought and thinkers were changed by World War II, rather than like, because like, you know, the event itself is like, you know, it is what it is. But I always liked it when you would have like an author, right, who would, you know, you'd have their pre-World War II work, and then after that, and then they would, you know, have a change in terms of what they would write about and their approach to, you know, their prose and things like that. Like that stuff fascinates me, and how it like really affected the arts in a profound way.
Well, what am I going to say now? Yui had a great answer that made them look really cool. And my answer was going to be basically that for a little while, I was the type of guy that Yui was talking about. Was talking
Making
about
the
maneuvers
models?
and shit.
Okay,
No.
tell me about it. Tell me, please. I
Very
want to hear
briefly,
it.
but I only will talk about it to confirm all of your suspicions.
How
which
old
is
were
that
you?
I was probably about 13 or 14. I read a
Okay.
bunch of
That's
Jeff and Michael Shara books. Are you guys familiar with these?
no.
Yeah, I see them at like flea markets
Yeah.
and shit all the
Are
time.
they brothers? Are they lovers?
No, they're father and son. I
Okay.
like that
It's a
a little
open-mindedness.
bit of
dynasty.
both then.
And this was very much a consequence of my father mentioning this as a cool thing and me
You're
admiring
telling
my
me
father a lot at the moment.
a boomer or Gen X dad liked World War II history?
Well, I will tell you that this is worse because a lot of what they wrote about was Civil War history. So this was the
Ooh,
stuff.
Yeesh.
And Revolutionary War history, I should say. Both of them. And so I got into it. And then once I figured out that my dad was only kind of into it, it sort of freed me up to realize that I didn't actually care about it that much either. So we're looking at like about 9 months. But the number of maps of battlefields you can look at in 9 months, I can only imagine. People who spend 5 decades on this, your brain is just a puddle of mud, right? It's just nothing.
Hey, great band.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
the thing about World War II history of this type is that it does have a real it offers all this minutia and all this basically math that frees you up from having to do any kind of ideological critique.
Correct. Yes.
And I found this to be the case when I was trying to do some research for this episode, that so much of you can write, 20 volumes on World War II without ever asking, like, was this a good idea?
And many people have done exactly that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Many beautiful old trees have been felled
Mhm.
for these stupid books. But
Someone to say that Nimitz was like a coward or an idiot or something, and that's not really the main concern.
Hold on, I did my dissertation on the Type 9 Nambu pistol that was used by this officer.
yeah.
Yeah.
Ian's thinking of another sort of, you might call it a capstone project involving a Type 9 Nambu pistol. You get my meaning. But
No, I don't get your meaning. What the fuck
Ian's
are you
going to shoot
talking
himself in the
about?
head was
Yeah.
the joke that I was making.
Oh,
yeah.
man, that's
Yeah.
shit. Jesus, that's man. This I don't know. This
Look
kind
forward
of
to more of that
podcast,
over the next
wow, okay.
little bit of our conversation. But the tendency also with, and I was thinking a lot about Tony Soprano, as I often do, is that
Okay.
World War II history does offer a kind of sneaky way for often men who want to be little tyrants to gotta hand it to the brilliant tactics of Nazis and fascists.
Like the obligations of scholarship. Like you can do this faux objectivity of like, well, just looking at the history, blah, blah, like it's like total bullshit.
He might have been on the wrong side, but if Rommel had been our guy,
Oh, but now that I'm over on this side, it's not so wrong. Cool, man. This fucking lame as shit.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the Civil War, Ian, because I was thinking, watching the film that we're gonna start talking about right now.
Man. It was World War II in the film. You must have been so confused watching all this stuff.
Can we take a 45-minute break? I'm gonna come back. But I was thinking about Ken Burns and Ken Burns' Civil War and the notion of war told through letters. And that war especially is the one where at least one popular sort of centrist conception of that war is, brothers fighting brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And good people on both sides. And we can relate to the people on both sides because they both spoke English. Yep. And so I think one of the many radical things about this, or quietly radical things about this film, Letters from Iwo Jima, directed by Clint Eastwood, is that it takes that form, which I don't know if, everyone going into the Regal Cinemas in Tempe, Arizona was thinking about how much this relates to Ken Burns' Civil War. But I mean, it's an entry point to exploring the headspace of people in a long ago battle that I think is one that invites relation to both sides of it. Am I wrong there? Should we have Shelby Foote on the horn? Remember that guy?
Yep.
One of those classic, like, foghorn leghorn accent motherfuckers from Ken Burns' Civil War. Well, let's talk about it. Letters from Iwo Jima, directed by Clint Eastwood. This was released December 20th, 2006, the same day as Rocky Balboa, which we talked about on our $1 Million Baby episode a little bit. And some other Christmas releases of that year coming out like 2 or 3 days on either side of this movie. Children of Men.
Oh, all right.
The Good
Grown's
Shepherd.
Finest.
Never seen it. It's supposed to be good. Night at the Museum, of course, a classic film, and Notes on a Scandal with Cate Blanchett and Judi Dench, which one time I was on an airplane, and the woman next to me watched Notes on a Scandal, and then when it finished, she turned it back on and watched it again. And then...
Play it back.
Long flight. Then she, like, nudged her husband and made him watch it on his screen next to her, which she was basically looking at. So
hold on, you're telling me in 1 year, not only do I got all these letters to read, but I got notes too? Motherfucker.
Wow. You got letters, you got notes.
Fuck.
Yeah. It's not why we watch movies.
Hey, I don't want to freaking read sort of part of what's going on in this film with the damn subtitles. And I try just listening to what the guys are saying. I don't speak this language. Really hard for me to... All right. So, Letters from Iwo Jima, if you want to watch it before you listen to the rest of our conversation, we highly encourage it. It's a great film. If you're in the United States, you can find it in all the usual places. Your Google Play Store. Spectrum has it on whatever. If you can stream through Spectrum, first of all, good on you. And second, you'll find Letters from Iwo Jima there. Ian, if folks are down there in Mexico, where is Letters from Iwo Jima available for them?
It is available streaming at a price on Microsoft, Cloud Video, Apple TV, of course, and Amazon.
And can I mention something else?
Yeah, please.
Just just for all the real heads out there, you could just watch it on your Blu-ray copy. Come on, people, get with it. Okay, they're taking shit away from you. They're taking it away from you, people. There's like, you can watch like 200 movies on Netflix, and that's it. Guess what? Guess what? My library,
surprise, bitch.
It's bigger. It's better. It's better.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, you can get a disastrous compulsion like me and have like 4,000 movies on Blu-ray and sometimes forget which ones you have and buy them again.
It's called a hobby.
It's called a hobby. Get a hobby, everybody. Blu-ray looks great. Yui, what's your? We called you a Clint Eastwood freak. We spoke to your bona fides, but what is your relationship to Clint, and what's your relationship to this movie prior to getting roped into this nonsense?
Well, Clint just taught me everything that I know about cinema from a very young age. I mean, truly, like, I think the most formative moment in my entire love of movies is like my dad showing me like the Dollars trilogy. And, I was like, oh, this is awesome. Wow. I was like, cool as shit. Never seen anything like this. It's so like fucking smart and sardonic and badass. And, like I was just, I was dialed in, right? But I wasn't dialed up yet, if you know what I mean. And so then he's like, hey, let's go to the used DVD shop. We buy like a copy of Unforgiven. And he's like, okay, I know you should do that. Check this shit out. And I watched that and I was like, I was like fucking 6 years old. And I'm like, I don't like, why are these movies like so different? Like as a kid, I like when I was very young, I used to think, oh, everything in a movie is like real. Cause it's like, you just, have it with a camera. It's real, right? You just put it together. It's a documentary basically.
Yeah.
At this point, I didn't believe in that anymore, but I was trying to think like why is Good and the Bad and the Ugly like kind of like a fun, crazy like romp, right? That's like, it's about some stuff, but ultimately it's about like three dudes.
It's about the same war as this movie.
Yeah, exactly.
From before. Remember how I was confused?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we're being a bit glib, right? Tuco is a glib character. And then I watch Unforgiven. I'm like, oh, this isn't glib. And it's actually like, it's kind of not fun either. It's kind of hard to watch. It was hard for me as like a kid to be like, oh man, this is what's happening. Like there's all this blood. And so like that's when he's like, oh, but like because I asked my dad, I was like, yeah, like why are these like different? Because he's still playing the same character, right? He's like, no, like this is a different thing. And it's like he directed this movie, like you see, and like he showed me the back of the box. And I was like, what does that mean? And like that set me on this whole path to understand. Just it's like, okay, like what does an artist do? Just in anything, right? Not even movies, but just for painting, for music, for like, okay, like what does that name actually mean? And just being on this whole journey with Clint my entire life, I've, I watched all his Westerns and I was like, okay, gotta, it just became a project, right? It became like, all right, I gotta watch every single fucking thing. And, I mean, just in so many ways, I feel, I want to ask you a question. Like, you guys know he's the GOAT, right? Like, you guys know that Clint Eastwood is the greatest filmmaker to ever exist in these United States, right? Like, I'm not even like, I'm being like as real as I can right now. And like, you guys do a whole podcast.
Yeah, we do a whole podcast. I said do. We also try to, we try to maintain some academic distance where we can, but I'm fully Clint pilled at this point. Ian's sort of position is as he's a holdout, not to invoke
That's right.
The Japanese soldiers of World War II, but Ian is, I think around 1979, he will finally learn that Clint Eastwood is the greatest filmmaker of all time, and he'll emerge from a cave.
Yeah, I'm certainly not convinced of his GOAT status, which is why I would love to have you on here, Yui. So it's good for somebody to get mad at me.
I feel like this movie is evidence of it as much as anything. I mean, you guys have been kind of going through the doldrum period a little bit, like, okay, space cowboys, I guess so.
We're getting into the stuff that people go gaga over. And,
and I mean, I think, okay, I'll, like, truly, any other filmmaker, no other American filmmaker would make a movie like this. Not a single fucking one, because
that's pretty.
Like, this was going to be a Spielberg movie about World War II that he was just going to, throw off again and be like, okay, another one.
Yeah, well,
one bites the dust.
I mean, my understanding of it is that Spielberg acquires the rights to the book that becomes Flags of Our Fathers, which is called Flags of Our Fathers. Had to look that up. Fucking 10 out of 10. Webby Award winning podcast coming up. Jesus Christ. So Spielberg, he acquires that. He's thinking about making it. Spielberg at this point is thick in the World War II muck. He's made...
He's thinking about Brothers. He's thinking about
the Pacific. 1941.
He's coming out with a movie every single year, sometimes two a year.
Yeah, I mean, he made that movie from The Fabelmans, where he poked the holes in the film with a pin to make it look like a gunshot. So he's got World War II on the brain, I think, because he is of that generation where he was a little boy when all this propaganda was, and all these movies about the war made afterward were suffusing his brain. So he acquires this, but he's already at this point made Band of Brothers. He's made, I think The Pacific is maybe after this, but Schindler's List, Saving Private Ryan, all this stuff. He's made all these war movies. And like with Bridges of Madison County, Clint gets involved, and suddenly it's a Clint project and not a Spielberg project. Obviously, Flags of Our Fathers is deeply indebted to Saving Private Ryan in its style. Same with this one. I mean, they both use at least in their visual style, they both use the desaturated, like, shot in color but almost black and white aesthetic in large sequences anyway. But while doing research for Flags of Our Fathers, like while preparing, Clint becomes aware of the General Tadamichi Kurabayashi. By the way, I'm going to use the Western name order because so much of my research uses it, and I'm but a simple man.
I'm also just gonna we're gonna fuck up a bunch of these. I'm gonna talk about Nihon Jinran and something. It's not gonna even
like
resemble
Kurabayashi,
the word.
The Ken Watanabe character. Clint becomes aware of this guy and reads a book that was published of his letters.
Picture letters from the commander-in-chief, I think.
Exactly, because he would write letters. These are mostly letters from his time prior to the war, the ones that made it back to his family. But he, as we see in the film, he studied in the United States and traveled around the United States, and he would, like his father before him, sketch little scenes from his life and send them back to his family. And I think it was Clint's like stumbling upon this interesting person that it then inspired him to turn the Flags of Our Fathers film into a diptych, one side of the Battle of Iwo Jima from the American perspective and one from the Japanese perspective. Which is just that's a pretty incredible thing to do, especially in 2006. We're 3 years into the Iraq War. I don't know. I mean, am I giving him too much credit there, Ian?
No, I think this is where I am going to join you guys. The fundamental choice of making this diptych, this duology, is pretty unique, particularly for a mainstream Hollywood filmmaker. I mean, I will say that, we almost exclusively talk about Hollywood cinema on this podcast, and I want to recognize that there are people doing interesting things in other parts of the world, and also even in the United States, just not in mainstream cinema. Yeah. So I think there's plenty of cases where people would do something as experimental as this, but to make giant blockbuster films starring, Ken Watanabe and the biggest actors basically that you could find for a Japanese-based picture appealing to an American audience, and pair it like this, I think that's totally singular. I think that's extremely unique. You guys are absolutely right.
Yui, what's your relationship to this movie?
I mean, I remember hearing about it as a kid because I was like fucking like 10 or something when these movies came out. And I remember I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, it's like two movies, but of the same thing. And, I was like, okay, I didn't know they could do that, but apparently it's a thing. And I don't think even at the time I really was aware that Clint had directed them, because I was still like watching the Westerns on VHS or whatever. And I hadn't really like understood the depth of his filmography beyond that. So I watched these like many years later. And I just think like these are, I mean, it's kind of weird to say having like a favorite war movie, I suppose, but we can just bury that Truffaut quote, whatever the fuck he said. We can bury that in its grave, because I think that these movies are exceedingly mature and thoughtful depictions of war that never surrender to the enormity or the kind of the action movie-ification that these have. And it's interesting that you compare them to Saving Private Ryan, because for me, like when I watch these, I'm like, these aren't exciting movies. These movies about essentially like the lies that you have to live with in order to exist within a military society and to wage war against an enemy. And Saving Private Ryan to me I mean, I don't think it's a terrible movie, but I think it's one of Spielberg's sloppiest, and I think it has some like fairly dangerous stuff in there that I like in retrospect isn't really as thought through as something like this. And it's why I'm really glad that Clint made these movies instead of it just being like, all right, Spielberg doing his thing again. Like, I think Clint has a pragmatic empathy here that Spielberg, like he wants to lionize the greatest generation so much that he'll include like the obligatory, like, man, war is hell, I guess. But hey, we
snipe a guy through his sniper lens.
Do what you got to do, right?
Possible.
Like, and to me, that's almost worse than the straight up propaganda, because it's like, oh, we're going to acknowledge moral complications, but we're just gonna kind of pretend that it doesn't matter. And like there's something sinister about that to me.
I mean, that's part of sort of the thesis of this podcast, is that like, Spielberg is one of the biggest Dems there is, gives a lot of money to the big D Democratic politicians. Spielberg makes these movies, and we think of Spielberg as like the liberal filmmaker, but they end up, serving ultimately as like the 90s version of 1940s war propaganda, just adding in a little bit of doubt and a little bit of moral vexing, because like there's the scene in Saving Private Ryan where they like, I don't know, don't they shoot like a German guy who's trying to surrender or whatever?
Multiple times. And it's like that's the stuff to me that's the most queasy about that, because it's like kind of portrayed as like, I guess we should feel bad about this, but hashtag not really. And it's like, okay, like for obviously fuck Nazis, but it's like the movie has a quiet bloodthirst to it that in like a film that owns that attitude, right? Like to me, I compare it to something that like Sam Peckinpah would make, right? Like he would make a movie that's just grimy and shitty and ugly, and you wouldn't it's not fun. Like you don't watch the WoW bunch. You're like, man, seems like a great time. Like,
yeah,
you watch it and you're like, okay, this is literal hell. And Spielberg, I think, he's a master and a genius, but I think the inherent tension in his filmography is that he can't help make things look good no matter what. And so now people watch that Normandy beach, they watch it on YouTube, they watch that scene, and they're like, oh man, what a banger. Crazy. It's like they watch it like it's like a scene from Die Hard or something. And to me, I just like, Clint he doesn't do that. And he doesn't really make movies with set pieces, really. He's just never done that. And I think him, making this movie about the Japanese side in Iwo Jima really goes a long way to show how you can make a war movie that isn't about, thrills or like spectacle. Like, you have a lot of the moments in here that are like the big, eye-catching moments are actually like stock footage from Flags of Our Fathers. It's just repurposed for a different use. And most of this movie is in interiors. It's in a fucking dank cave.
It's
like
in caves.
You're not seeing like, oh man, we're climbing up the hill. Like, you're not getting that. And like Flags of Our Fathers, I think, is pretty good about this too. But especially this movie, like the war isn't fucking glorious and exciting and whatever. It's just you're just sitting around waiting to die.
It's all, and both of these movies are about the ideological underpinnings and the things that are sold to rank and file enlisted men. Often, as we mentioned, like, not too many years separated from the kind of bonehead shit you were getting up to when you were reading charts of battles, Ian. Like 19, 20-year-olds. And on the Japanese side, at least in this film, you do see a lot more men with families and careers and stuff who are conscripted into the army. But both of these movies are about complicating the notion that everybody felt exactly the same way about doing what had to be done, that this was, in the US, it's often thought of as like the last noble war or whatever. I think in their own ways, it's a very special thing that Clint is like challenging that. And in this film, Hollywood movies are pretty much always the Japanese are depicted as what's the name? Are they called the Zerg in Star Trek? Yeah, they're just like a horde of, it's like a hive mind of brainwashed,
essentially like zombies with guns. There's not that much of a difference.
Like, I was scared,
not afraid of death.
Yeah, it's that comes up a lot, and you get the groupism, the sort of like Japanese national spirit myth that was sold to the people. But then I was so scared, and this is where my pessimism. You guys maybe were not affected by this because you trust more in the GOAT. But the moments when they have seen
donkey,
the young American soldier die, and they're thinking like, okay, we're not so different. And to me, it was dangerously close, dancing so near to saying like, well, actually, let's free our minds and recognize our shared humanity with these beautiful Americans who actually maybe are freer than we are in some ways in their individual thinking. And then I think within 6 minutes or something, one of the guys escapes and gets shot by the American soldiers who don't want to walk
shoot
back to
some
the beach.
surrenderers because it would be inconvenient for them to have to like stick around
and that cemented it for me. It's like, okay, you can critique what is basically conservative Japanese thinking and also not have it be a American propaganda film.
Pretty cool.
Yep.
A little bit of just plot summary background. So the film begins with some Japanese archaeologists exploring some of the tunnels on Iwo Jima. They find something in the dirt. It's going to turn out at the end of the film, not to spoil things, that these were some letters from Iwo Jima. We cut back to Iwo Jima 1944. Iwo Jima, by the way, is a very small island.
Yeah, are we going to call it Iwo Jima, by the way? Made-up name.
So part of the legacy of this film actually is that the name of the island has been restored to its original state. Ian and I, neither of us are Japanese scholars or linguists, but apparently the symbol for the original name of the island, Iwo-to, the to part looks identical to the symbol for Jima.
It's like a Chinese loan word version of the kanji. There's also Shima.
Yeah, and so it seems like maybe some Japanese military planners started calling it Iwo Jima while they were strategizing about it, and then the name just stuck. And now, in part because of the very famous photograph, everyone in the United States knows about Iwo Jima. And after this film, some of the original residents and descendants of residents of Iwo Jima, there were only like 1,000 people who lived on the island prior to their evacuation before the battle. They wanted the name of the island restored. It has since been restored, although no one is allowed to live there now except Japanese soldiers. But this is a little ass island. It's southeast of the Japanese home islands. It's about as far from mainland Japan. It's sort of a funny way to put it, but it's about as far from Tokyo as like Los Angeles is from Denver. A little closer, but not by much. And it means Sulphur Island. Apparently the place stinks.
Mm-hmm.
I was threatening to send Ian some Kala Namak black salt, which smells strongly of sulfur, so that he could have sort of the sensory experience that a lot of these guys are having. But you've got Private First Class Saigo, who's played by Kazunari Ninomiya, who is a J-pop idol singer as well as an actor. He is a conscripted baker who is sort of our main, like, I don't know if I want to be here audience surrogate guy. He's great, I think. And he and his buddy are digging like trenches on the beach when Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kurabayashi, played by the great Ken Watanabe, lands. And the film is largely about Kurabayashi sort of having his own way of planning the defense of Iwo Jima, clashing with the more traditional conservative ideas of the other commanding officers. And Saigo's sort of just trying to stay alive against the actions both of the Americans and lots of
fucked up heinous shit.
Yeah, fucked up heinous shit, and also a bunch of like a not insignificant number of Japanese superiors who want to kill him or insist that he kill himself. So that's basically the movie. What do we think about Ken Watanabe? Me personally, I'm a big fan. I think he should be the president. But what do you guys? How do you feel about
international treasure?
Yeah, I mean, he's charm central. It's almost bad casting because of how charming he is. And I think you guys are referencing one of the heights of the movie is sort of recognizing that there aren't really out and out heroes. Although I think, of course, the real person of the general is a fascinating figure. But I don't know. I'm never sorry to see Ken Watanabe.
Yeah. And at this point, he's been in The Last Samurai in 2003, and he's also been in Batman Begins the year prior to this. He's in Memoirs of a Geisha. So he is like the Japanese actor that American audiences would recognize in this period. Interestingly, he also goes on to star in a Japanese remake of Unforgiven in the William Money role. It's set in the Meiji era. That's in 2013.
I haven't seen it. Have either of you seen it?
I have not yet.
No, I really want to see that shit because it sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, it sounds pretty cool. It's Patreon shit. You want to see that? You got to cough up a little scratch. I love Ken. Big fan of Ken. I think he's great in this movie. He does also have I'm looking at a picture here of him and Clint at the Berlin Film Festival next to each other. He's got a kind of... They're not that dissimilar from each other. Both very tall, lanky, kind of often furrowed brow, strong, silent type. Love these guys.
Well, they have a little bit of that same... Like, even when they talk, it's like a little bit of at a hushed whisper level. There's a lot of that in this movie.
Again, I had no idea what these guys were talking about. There's a bunch of these words at the bottom of the screen. I couldn't make heads or tails of those.
I had a quick question for you guys because you both had the real Blu-ray and I was watching it streaming. My version did a thing that I'm actually very fond of in foreign language films, which is it didn't translate the names or like certain words that were extremely obvious in context. Was that just an artifact of the version I was watching, or is that also true for your guys' version?
Yeah, that was true on my Blu-ray as well.
Yeah,
I
like when they say
a lot.
like bonsai or whatever.
Yeah, he says Fujita, or they say like Ike or something. They, just sort of understood that you will get what is happening.
Well, at Yui's very generous suggestion, I watched the Battle of Okinawa in advance of this record. And the file of that I had that was very legally obtained,
the same file.
Yeah, the subtitles kept providing context for things. Like there's a part in that movie where two soldiers are like, remember when we saw the Blue Danube? And the subtitles just explain like Blue Danube 1928 movie directed by whatever. And for a second I was like, is this guy saying this? Like, is he saying that it was directed by... Like, oh, no. They're just trying to help me out.
Yeah, but I like the lack of hand-holding, the opposite of that, basically.
By the way, story by Iris Yamashita and Paul Haggis. Paul Haggis from $1 Million Baby. We're not crazy about this guy. Got some problems with this guy. Iris Yamashita was... It seems like basically they were looking for a fluent Japanese and of Japanese descent screenwriter to help them turn the story idea into an actual script. She grew up in Hawaii, Guam, and Japan, studied engineering at UCSD in Berkeley, and then spent a year at the University of Tokyo studying virtual reality. Seems like a cool lady. Then she sort of turned to screenwriting. This is her only produced screenplay. She has since taught screenwriting at UCLA and mostly seems to be focused on publishing a few novels. So shout out to Iris Yamashita. Shot by Tom Stern, who's been Clint's guy since Bloodwork. Edited by Joel Cox and Gary D. Roach. Ian, you've been on the sort of the Roach tip. Is this his first? This is
his first full film. Yeah,
credited. Yeah,
I mean, he's been in the editorial department for many, many years now. Yeah, but yeah, now he's sharing the role with Joel Cox.
He'll go on to edit a number of these Clint's films going forward, as well as Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners and Taylor Sheridan's Wind River. Interesting. And then we've got the music. This is the first time that Kyle Eastwood is credited as the composer, along with Michael Stevens, who is sort of a regular collaborator with him. But Kyle's been working on the music for the last couple of Clint films, but this is the first time his compositions are credited on screen.
I'm just going to say that on the subject of editors, I wonder if that's one of the only aspects of this film that turns it into a more traditional, heroic Hollywood picture. And I think it's combated very valiantly by the shot choices, the lighting, the story, the acting, basically everything else. But I think the pacing of the film is still distinctly blockbustery to me. And I don't know if that, for me, is one of the only shortcomings that I think if you're going to be brave enough to write a film that's like 20% about dysentery and war, which I love, wonderful, terrific. You're getting all these actors really in there highlighting these elements of war that, were basically totally ignored, like you're saying, particularly the Japanese side of World War II. And even in the action sequences, you're shooting it sort of like punishing the audience for wanting to see action, which I think is terrific. I love this. Yeah, this is, like story of Unforgiven. But the editing itself is still like thrill based, which maybe is just trying to capture the experience of war. But I don't know. I just give me some longer, lingering.
So, Ian, what you're saying is you want the slow cinema version of Letters from Iwo Jima.
I think I do. I will just tell you right now.
It's one of the great Clint movies. If this was edited like a Hoshio Shin movie or like a Bella Tarr film, this would be the greatest movie ever made. Like,
see, all right. See, Yui, this is what I'm talking about. If we had
that, I agree with you.
Get it? I want to see him pouring like 3 shots of Johnny Walker like at normal pace, and we will watch
funny
him
that you bring that up, because I would argue that like when he gets to Cry Macho, like the shots go on for so long and the pace is so deliberate that it's almost like he like stumbles into doing like a quasi Bresson movie. Like it's so stripped back that you're like, okay, is anyone editing this, or is this just like we stopped filming and then we just glued the things together? Like there's something about that.
Editing in camera. Yeah. Exciting to look forward to. I didn't know prior to watching this film. I mean, obviously I knew about the various forms of honor suicide that were traditional to especially the samurai period in Japan. And then my understanding is that they were sort of brought back as a kind of ultra nationalist, like this is our cultural heritage idea by the kind of propaganda masters in Japan during the World War II to sort of prepare the population to send their loved ones off to die and perhaps to die themselves.
Yeah, it's part of this bigger idea called kokutai, this like Japanese spirit that they're trying to re-embody as, like you're saying, an extremely ultra-nationalist version. Right. And that's why we get it in cool people like Mishima, who ends up doing it when he tries to...
Oh my God. I'm glad you brought him up, because I wanted to bring him up too in this. Because from my understanding, and like, again, I would love to be proven wrong or something, but the whole idea of like harakiri or seppuku, when it came to, you know, like samurai times, was that it was, you know, like you're all samurai, you're all part of an organization. It's like everyone has essentially addressed it as more of a class thing, right? You're a part of this class, so you have these certain obligations, and a part of it is, you know, this whole, you know, the code of bushido and all this.
Right. Yeah. Bushido like didn't apply to regular people. It was like,
And so then you have the Meiji Restoration, and then afterwards, like Japan just becomes increasingly more and more industrialized and more militarized. And I think they're looking back on that, right? And it's kind of perverse because, you know, like these this new military that Japan has created, it was, you know, the reason that samurai don't exist anymore. But they were like, but you know what's great though? That whole thing about like, you know, putting your death before, you know, like any possible notion of surrender, so that, you know, we just created a culture of fanaticism. And so they reinscribed that from an institutional class-based thing into being almost like this is a part of like everyone's culture. And so every, like, you know, where they would, you know, they had people in the mainland preparing for the, you know, invasion by America and the Soviet Union, and they would just have it where it's like, okay, you're, you know, every part of your family, you know, okay, the mom and the kid, all right, everyone gets a grenade, and you guys just, you know, when the time comes, just do what you got to do. Like it became this like hysterical, I don't know, like it just became like an enforced policy almost.
Yeah, I mean, I watched these films in release order. With a little peek behind the curtain, we're recording this before our Flags of Our Fathers episode, but I watched Flags of Our Fathers first, came out like 2 months prior to this one. And that film shows only the aftermath of some of these gyokusai suicides by grenade. So you just see like prosthetic bodies of Japanese soldiers sort of blown in half by grenades held to the chest. And then it's very effective to just suddenly you see recognizably those same caves and these men in them, and you're not sure when the gyokusai is going to come and in what form. And I think Clint does a great job of giving us a wide swath of fanatical, like, confidence doing it, and terror in the face of guys doing it seemingly because, you know, they're scared, but they at this point kind of want to get out of the situation. He really challenges the notion of sort of this blind and death crazed horde.
Yeah, it goes from being like a thing where, all right, everyone's on the same page, to like, no, we're all just kind of figuring this out in the moment, because like we all talked about doing this, but did we really think that we're going to do this? And, you know, you watch it in this where people, it's like they're presented with the fact of like, all right, here's your duty. Yeah, you know, commit yourself to the emperor in the afterlife, and their reaction is like, are we actually doing this? Okay, I guess we are. Like there's a variety of reactions to it.
A big thing about Kobayashi was that he was opposed to bonsai charges. He was opposed to a lot of the sort of the suicide tactics of other Japanese commanders at the time. And I think it's interesting, coming off of something like $1 Million Baby, Clint is exploring these ideas of like dying meaningfully or dying intentionally. And I am strongly opposed to I want to be clear. I'm strongly opposed to the state insisting that anyone kill themselves. But
and in fact, I'm going to go so far as to say fragging your superior officer is one of the bravest things that you can probably do if you're conscripted into a war.
Cool. Yeah. Everybody look up Warren Ellis's dad. But anyway, there is a way that, especially considering this film and Flags of Our Fathers in relationship to one another, there's something that I respect about the way that the Japanese propaganda machine was honest about how you're probably going to die. Like, we're sending you to go die at some point during this process. People seem to understand it a lot better. Whereas in every World War II film, from the American perspective, you get a lot of the sense of, be careful. I'm not going to die, mama. I'm going to go serve my country or whatever. And that's just, especially for regular infantrymen, like that, their purpose is to get fucking bullets in them, to catch some of the bullets.
I think it was a carry on from what happened in World War I with like the British and American propaganda there, where all of it was, be back before Christmas. Like, it was always this rhetorical, like, you're just going to go on a little sojourn and that's about it. And you're like, no, no, that's not happening.
The numbers do bear it out. There were fewer than 500,000 American military casualties, or military deaths, I should say. And there were like somewhere between 2 and 3
million Soviet deaths or something.
Well, and then somewhere between 2 and 3 million just military deaths of Japanese soldiers, not including the insane numbers of civilian deaths.
But yeah, I agree, Jake. It's kind of cool to see a culture that is less death averse, at least on the surface. So I think part of the movie is investigating, well, people individually have still not necessarily come to terms with the grip of mortality or what it means for losing your future, losing your loved ones. But I think, yes, the United States and Western culture in general are often terrible about pretending that death doesn't exist. So
in denial.
Yeah, that I appreciate. But yeah, I think the affinity between the US propaganda machine and the Japanese propaganda machine is one of the things that these two films do well, right? And sort of saying like, okay, you're both sold lies. And I think it's interesting that in this moment, Japan is so intensely like trying to rewrite its own history, do this nationalistic myth making, something.
Which moment are you talking about?
Which moment? You mean, are you asking if this was in the Civil War, or what's your question?
No, fuck off. Just you little Ian's. First of all, he's doing something really fast and repetitive with his hand under the desk. I don't know what it is. I can't say for sure.
Yep.
No, I mean, like, do you mean in this moment you're talking about in the 1940s, or are you talking about now?
Oh, no, yeah. Okay. Good question. Fair question. No, I'm talking about in the lead up to World War II in the Showa periods here. So this country is basically trying to convince its population that, yes, this is what it means to be Japanese. They're like coming up with all sorts of myths about like race origins about Japan as being totally unique.
In an imperial project that is very similar to that of the United States.
Exactly. I mean, even if we don't claim
territorially,
manifest destiny type stuff.
I would also like to bring up, there was a lot of there was like a pamphlet. I forget, it was like something like "Read this and like the war can be won" or something like that. There's a pamphlet that was handed out in the warriors during Japan, where like a lot of what was being told in there was that, the American army, like, they recruit people out of like insane asylums and prisons, so like you don't expect to be treated well because they'll just kill you, so you might as well kill yourself. Right. And there was also this idea that like that Japan was the rising star of the entirety of Asia, right? And coming out of the 19th century, I think it's instructive to see like a lot of this is in reaction to the colonial project, right? Like, Japan, there's this paranoia where it's like, well, we're not going to have, like, what happened to China is not going to happen to us. And so we're going to,
like, Thailand they invade Thailand and they convince Thailand to join them because they say like, well, you guys have been a colonial subject of France, England, a bunch of different places. So would you rather be in like the Pan-Asian unity project?
Yeah, so I thought like it's up to us to lead, everyone else in Asia into, being a part of this empire to form a resistance against, Western powers. And it's interesting how it's like you go, you start at the 19th century and it's like Japan is closed off to everything. Like no one knows anything essentially.
Yeah, I mean, there is an irony. We're jumping around a little bit, but like, I think Clint is unique among American filmmakers for seeing the sad irony in Watanabe's death scene, where he asks if Iwo Jima, which is basically a volcano with some dirt next to it, that was like, I think a German territory before this, and if it's still Japanese soil when he dies, because he wants to die on Japanese soil, and we get a sense that is at once a noble thing to do. I mean, to want to die on your home soil, even if Japan is a country that was basically ethnically cleansed just a really long time ago. The Jomon people who originally lived there have just been wiped out, like before the woke mind virus. But Clint shows this as both kind of a sad, sweet last comfort to the Watanabe character, while also being like patently absurd.
Yeah,
I think that's the genius of Clint, is that he takes the historical perspective into account, but he doesn't use that to then like make light of the emotional drama of the situation. Like, I think some other directors would do that kind of scene and be like, yeah, and isn't that fucking dumb and silly? And I don't think that's Clint's goal. It's like to be, basically kind of talking down to his characters. He takes the drama seriously, and he respects the integrity of the character to say, okay, well, this does make sense for him. Like, even if it is, like you said, wrong and absurd, it's like, well, that's in essence what, he needs to essentially like pass with some degree of, peace, and that's not nothing.
Yeah, he's literally, I mean, with the editing that you're talking about, Ian, and with the using the Hollywood playbook, he has, at least for me, effectively made us like hope and pray, cross our fingers that this guy will be able to kill himself before the Americans get to him. Like the bad guys that were hoping,
you don't know what the hell's going to happen.
Yeah, but those bad guys are the GIs. They're our boys overseas.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are absolutely right. There is no, in a personal experience at the subjective level, there is not a gap between like where historical or national propaganda begins and where your experience begins. I mean, that's why all nationalistic projects are so effective, right? Or fascistic or semi-fascistic, because you're convincing people that not just that, you have to fight for your country and that this way of life is great, but you convince them that like, well, do you love your family? This is protecting your family, right?
Yes.
And we get that little song from the kids on the mainland singing to the people on the island, telling them to, fight until their last breath. And it's a mix of
Jesus
saying,
Christ, yeah,
this is extremely effective propaganda that's nasty, right, in some ways. But also, I think, as you guys are saying, Ken Watanabe is playing it as, well, I'm also just listening to these children, and I'm thinking about my children, the people I'm trying to protect. And even if I know, I think it comes across, at least to me, that he's aware that this is the fact that he's already been abandoned by the Japanese government. This sort of threw him away, threw all the people on the island away. But recognizing that also there are still children there. That's not like a total fascistic fantasy. There actually are people that I'm trying to protect, and that's why it gets all muddled ultimately.
Yeah, well, in both of these movies, letters and flags underline that the people on Iwo Jima are, the militaries of both these countries are running out of shit. Like, they are hurting, and it's not like they have the full support of the entire war machine behind them, because they're, this it's 1944. This has gone on for a long time. They're on the dregs. They're like starving to death and dying of thirst.
I mean, it's important to remember too that it's like Japan, goes from the Sino-Japanese War then right into this, right? So it's like there's no break in the middle to be like, okay, let's have a normal life. Like, there's none of that.
Right. I want to talk about the Ninomiya, the Saigo storyline. Love this guy. Cute little guy.
Such good casting. He's just the right amount of annoying to me, which again, this is a branching roads thing from Spielberg. I don't think he would ever cast somebody like this, who is both totally relatable, kind of charming and funny, but also just slightly whiny and unpleasant. And from the beginning,
with Spielberg, he would have to
except in his masterpiece, The Fabelmans, he would cast somebody like that.
Oh yeah, let's not forget about that.
Yeah. Sorry, you. I interrupted you to own Ian.
Yeah, you did, and I thank you for that. What was I saying? Yeah, no, I think it's like in the Spielberg version of this diptych. Well, first, like Letters from Iwo Jima probably wouldn't exist at all. But if you were to make this kind of thing and have the Saigo character, it's like at some point in the movie there would have to be with him. It's like especially in the scenes where he's like talking to his child. Like there would be a whole lot more like flashbacks to this or that. We would have to emphasize the fact that like, oh, but you know what though? He's just an average Joe. And it's like what I like that Clint does in this is that he just has the character. He's like, yeah, I'm like, you understand. It's like, yeah, if I was put in that situation, I would be fucking, whiny and like just you're tired and just be like, okay, like this isn't a volunteer army. I was conscripted, so I'm a baker. What do you want from me? There's
a baker with a pregnant wife.
There's a pragmatic attitude that isn't. It's not romanticized. It's like, all right, I'm a regular person, and
and this is like the first person we're introduced to is a guy who the one thing we know about the Japanese army in World War II from American movies is that they're all blindly faithful to the emperor, and the first thing we get is these guys digging like a shitty stupid hole on the beach, and they're like, I fucking hate this, and then somebody else is like, I'm gonna kill you for saying that. And it's cool as hell. I love this guy. I want to shout out, he's one of the members of the idol band Arashi. He also is he's one of at least two, maybe more actors, Japanese actors in this film who had previously on stage played the James Dean role in Rebel Without a Cause. Japan is apparently staging Rebel Without a Cause a lot. And several of these guys.
Cool.
Maybe it's sort of
good casting. Makes sense to me.
We've also got he's put out some music as a solo performer. He's in Assassination Classroom. He does a voice in there. Same role year as this. He does one of the lead voices in Tech on Concrete. So he's having a big 2006. He also his debut on stage was as the River Phoenix character in a stage version of Stand By Me.
Wow.
Some cool stuff going on stage in Japan.
Yeah, a lot of stage stuff. Holy shit.
Yes.
And then he's kind of just like wandering through the film. At a certain point, Kobayashi orders the forces to retreat, I believe, he
wants them to go to the north side of the caverns.
Yeah.
He's staged a classic defense in depth strategy where you're just forcing these people to fight and fight.
I also saw that term on Wikipedia, Ian. Ian's no military genius.
What I'm saying is I have also read that term in these horrible books that I'm talking about.
Right. So Kobayashi, he orders retreat, and then Colonel Adachi, who is Saigo's commanding officer, and this guy, he's bought into the ideology, and he refuses this order. He ignores this order in favor of forcing all of the men to kill themselves with the hand grenade. Gotta say, Ian and I were talking about this. The sort of ritual, the private ritual of pulling the pin and then hitting yourself on the helmet with the grenade before clutching it to your chest, I do think would make it easier to do. I gotta say. Am I wrong there?
No, I think you're right. I think this is good military planning. If you're also trying to propagandize people to kill themselves when they've failed and become fanatics, like you said, then make it as easy as possible.
Also, the idea, right, is that with seppuku, right, you're supposed to do it with a sword, and you're supposed to have someone else with a sword to lop off your head.
Yeah.
And in the Imperial Japanese Army at this time, the only people who could afford to have swords were, people who were officers.
Right.
So
but
it's
they
like,
were actually required to have swords, but they weren't. They had to like make the swords quickly, and so they're not as well made.
Like sheet metal and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, for the grunts, swords, yeah, don't worry about it. We got grenades for you. It's much more effective and instantaneous.
Right. My question is they have a little wooden box where each grenade has its own little straw bed. Is this a special box of suicide grenades, or are these the grenades? Is it just when you get down to your last grenades?
I believe it's just normal grenade. I don't imagine that they were sending, but maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, Jake, the real question here is, would you have a special box of suicide grenades? Like, would you specialize it that much where there's kind of engravings on the outside? There's maybe, like a sticky note to just remind people. That's one of the
things that I do have to admire about this culture of dying
ceremony,
intentionally. Yeah, I mean, in the Battle of Okinawa, they've reprinted a lot of the kamikaze pilots would write down their last words. They'd give a kind of. They do have. This maybe speaks to the age of most of the people that are sent to die by crusty old West Point psychos, but they often feel like a yearbook quote. And there's like one guy who does a little bit, and you're like. I mean, I always respect somebody doing a bit, but you are about to go die.
It's okay to be sincere for a second.
It's your last bit, though. Like,
yeah, the final bit.
Though. You want to waste it?
Kurosawa supposedly did write also a death poem that is like lightly satirical or critical of the Japanese government.
What else are you going to do?
Yeah.
By the way, Colonel Adachi, the guy who makes them kill themselves, played by Toshi Toda, an actor who is in Just Married with Ashton Kutcher and Brittany Murphy. He's in Menace to Society as Grocery Store Man.
Don't forget Crank.
He's in Pearl Harbor. Yeah, he's in Crank. I was going to say he's in Crank. He was on the Perry Mason TV show. Shout out Ian, who likes to watch TV.
I just watched the second season a couple weeks ago. You're right.
He was on iCarly. Shout out to Ian, who likes to watch TV. Chuck.
I'm starting to like Ian less. I don't know why.
No, you're right about that. That's how I feel about it as well.
He's in Click. Just the same year. He's in Click, Crank, and Letters from Iwo Jima. Huge 2006.
Honestly, can we just say that might be the best 2006 that anyone's ever had? Like, who else compares?
Pretty strong.
Yeah.
Oh, and he's in the Roland Emmerich Godzilla as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we don't talk about that.
Yeah.
I didn't say anything. It was Ian who said that. But I want to talk also about, well, you know what? I'd like to just bring in friend of the show, we hope, Kiyoshi Kurosawa, who spoke at length on this film to provide perspective of a Japanese filmmaker. One Japanese filmmaker. Obviously, this film teaches us that Japanese people are not a monolith. But
before you read this actually interesting insight, I was also Googling around to try to find something similar. Found an extremely poorly written AP interview where they were just like ambushing Japanese people outside of a movie theater to ask them about it. And
well, this movie did really well in Japan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But it's sort of funny to force like three individuals. They said like the 50-year-old carpenter could not say enough nice things about the movie. And I get slice of life stuff, but I would rather hear from somebody who has some critical insight into filmmaking.
Honestly, that's very elitist of you, Ian. I don't know about that.
You're absolutely right to call me out on that. But I will say that I guess I fear that somebody like the AP would just pick whichever people they want to represent the narrative that they're putting into this article. That. Yeah, and they wouldn't actually, make it an honest attempt.
So the problem is not with the pros; it's with the journalists. I see. I agree with you.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, because if you were going to give me like a true swath of different opinions, great. I want to hear them all, but not this weird thing where we're patting ourselves on the back for actually being some of the most Japanese guys in the whole world.
Kiyoshi Kurosawa, the great filmmaker. He's giving an interview about this film. For me, the question of whether the Japanese characters in the film appear natural when compared to the reality of the time is basically irrelevant. It's true that some have said no one in the Japanese army at the time was capable of having such strong and clear personal opinions, or it's unnatural for the two characters who have lived in the U.S. to be the humane ones. But if one were to ask them what the true state of Japanese soldiers was at the time, they'd have to admit they really don't know. The soldier played by Kazunari Ninomiya and the lieutenant general played by Ken Watanabe may appear far too contemporary, but that's only in comparison to the old-fashioned and nostalgically made Japanese war movies to date. Letters from Iwo Jima at least offers what seems to me a picture of war far closer to reality than those earlier films. Needless to say, the idea of gyokusai is difficult to understand for Japanese as well. At the same time, I wonder if the principle of an individual sacrificing oneself for the good of the whole might be more universal than we think. You can find plenty of American films about heroes that do this. The truth is probably that people who don't ordinarily think of such an act will, under certain situations, suddenly arrive at a gyokusai or heroic state of mind and take action. Depending on how it's portrayed, it may look tragic, inspirational, or even absurd. In Letters, the character I found especially fascinating in that regard is the officer played by Shido Nakamura, who most directly embodies those human contradictions. Among foreign films that were released in Japan last year, Letters was ranked first on nearly all top 10 lists, in addition to becoming a big box office hit. That itself is great news, and yet the sad truth about today's Japan is that many of the same people who were moved by this film will also shed a tear as they watch some preposterous warmongering film. To put it frankly, the anti-war and the pro-war, the liberal and the conservative, the right wing and the left wing, all strangely coexist in the same person's heart. That's the typical Japanese today.
Great.
Shout out Kiyoshi Kurosawa. Beautifully put.
Mm-hmm.
The Shido Nakamura character, this is the guy who puts the landmines around his neck and can't find a tank.
Just laying down for too long.
And then eventually he falls asleep. Relate to that part. And then eventually he is this guy who tries really hard to die, accidentally ends up surviving the battle.
Mm-hmm.
Just a, brilliant example of how stupid and absurd war is and how the individual intentions of individual people are sort of irrelevant to the broader movements of people and material involved here.
And I think in a worse film, we get him exposing the absurdity one time in the same way we get one reference to dysentery. And I do think what elevates this movie is that they come back to it, right? They are really forcing you to, sort of compare everything or put everything in context with these elements of absurdity or human suffering, or just kind of like debasing, showing that the flip side of extremely elevated human virtue, or trying to talk about yourself as a subordinate of a nation or a national ideal, is also that you're just constantly shitting yourself or putting another guy's blood on your face, which is just kind of nasty when it's not, successful, particularly.
I mean, that's what makes it Clint. That's his auteur shit. Right. He's like, go back to the shit. Let's play it back. And honestly, I fucking respect it. No, and
me too.
It's interesting because it's somewhat reminiscent of the weird humor that he has in some of his other movies. It's not really humorous here. It's a little bit, but there's a similar way that he handles that absurdity that I think is very much in keeping with his stylistic fixations.
Yeah, his anti-war stance is pretty consistent throughout his career. I think a lot of his 70s westerns like Outlaw Josie Wales and High Plains Drifter have been described as anti-Vietnam films. I think High Plains Drifter for me works more as at least a condemnation of violence. But the guy hates authority. He hates people in power telling people without power what they should do. And sometimes he hates people in power telling him, another person in power, what he should do. But that's another issue. But I think both of these films just expose how fucking stupid and pitiful the lives of these soldiers are in a way that, honestly, watching this and Flags and the Battle of Okinawa made me feel insane. It's so crazy to me. I feel like a 5-year-old who is why is there war? But it is such an insane waste of life and resources, and goes against everything that we're often told all these things about how we should not be wasteful. Efficiency is lionized, and the careful apportionment of resources or whatever. And then in these films you get things like people destroying I mean, it's all about like blowing up planes before they can take off and shit like that. It's just it's I don't know, not to be like an 18-year-old smoking weed in a dorm room, but like it's fucking crazy, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, capitalism ultimately, like, what is the function of warfare in capitalism? It is the management of resources and human entropy, right?
Yeah.
Like you're essentially destroying so that then you can use all that quote unquote liberated resources to then funnel this stuff here and there. I mean, if you look at what happened in Japan, right? I mean, Japan is like one of the craziest instances of a nation that was essentially like rebuilt twice in 100 years and like reindustrialized twice. And, like after the war, I mean, no one wants to fucking say this shit, but like to some extent, like many of America's allies, I mean, Japan is somewhat, I'm not going to say it's a colony, but like if you look at the amount of bases that America has in places like Okinawa and many other islands, it's
and Iwo Jima, like, America doesn't, I'm doing scare quotes, America doesn't have nuclear weapons on Iwo Jima, officially.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, well, we, go in here, wreck shop, rock'em sock'em, destroy all that shit, and then, now we're gonna rebuild, and isn't that nice? And it's like, okay, but rebuild to what? And, to bring up Mishima again, like, it's funny because he's a direct creation of this whole process, right? It's that he was dealing with the remnants of the imperial Japanese ideology in the world that was created by the American occupation and the reindustrialization and the introduction of mass consumer goods and this kind of like cultural materialism and all that kind of stuff. And so you just see these things, and of course like these things always feed back into whatever cycle is going on next, right? So a big anxiety that a lot of people deal with in Japanese politics is, it's like, okay, like how are we stepping around China? Because, you're kind of a foothold for America's general project in all of Asia. And so that, puts a lot of pressure on a tiny island. And, I mean, you're right, it's madness. And to me, like the even more maddening thing is how this stuff, just gets repurposed into, whatever struggle is then, feeding into the next part, right? It goes into a loop.
And one of the people actively engaged in this question, I think on the wrong side, is Yoshitaka Shindo, who's one of Kurobayashi's grandchildren, who is a Japanese politician of the Liberal Democratic Party, which, despite the name, for anyone who doesn't know, is the ultra-conservative, ultra-nationalist party in Japan. He's a member of the House of Representatives and part of Nippon Kaigi, which is I guess the equivalent of like not their MAGA caucus exactly, but it's a government organization who's like, or like a affiliation whose official position includes things like comfort women didn't exist. Like it's like denial of Japan's imperial crimes in the 30s and 40s is like part of their party platform. So
yeah, we haven't really addressed. I'd like to rewind slightly because we're talking about Imperial Japan and we haven't mentioned why the U.S. and Japan go to war. You're asking why war, Jake. And I think for most Americans, the understanding is, well, they attacked Pearl Harbor for some reason. And that was, of course, unforgivable. But what we really have is just a beautiful encapsulation of colonialist powers butting heads. Because, of course, you do have Japan doing awful things like taking over, Manchuria and China in the aforementioned Sino-Japanese War, the Second Sino-Japanese War. And the U.S. comes in like a beautiful white-caped heroes and says, we don't like countries that invade other countries, so we're putting an oil embargo on you, and we're going to force you to sign this non-aggression pact with any other Pacific countries, Asian countries. But of course, buried in that second part is the real American interest, which is that we have been colonizing the Philippines and parts of Indonesia, and so has the UK, and so have the Netherlands. And we're extremely scared that Japan, as they do once our conflict starts with them, will remove our access to those like raw material and labor generating places. So this is not to say that the Japanese are the good guys by any means. They are colonizing very rapidly at this point. But the U.S.'s interest in this is not some kind of benevolence, or maybe there's, some people who
spreading democracy or whatever.
Yeah. Although I will say that that's basically what the Japanese said also, right? Is that we are singular paragons of virtue, this is just like neoconservatism in the US, right? Saying that if we have the best system, it's our responsibility to share the system with as many people as possible. So
through whatever bloodshed
yes, exactly.
is required. Yeah. Thank you for that context, Ian. That's helpful.
Yeah, and
I
also
now think that it was right that we went to war.
Yes, that's right. Well, we also have to talk about the Kempente, the secret police.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned this guy. I love this guy.
Shimizu.
Ryokase as Shimizu, who's enters Saigo's company or whatever as just sort of a mysterious new addition. They quickly find out that he was in the Kempeitai, because they're all talking about, like, where did you train? Kempeitai were the sort of a combination military police and secret police among civilians during this time. So they're all afraid of him. They think they're spying on him or spying on them and gonna report their relatively mild expressions of dissatisfaction with their lot here on Iwo Jima. It turns out that he was kicked out of the Kempeitai. We see a flashback scene where he refuses to execute a family's dog, basically at the whim of his superior who wants to punish for the sake of punishment.
Well, I think there's also the implication that he's like testing him in a way. Like it's kind of like, all right, like do this so that I can like trust you in some capacity.
I mean, he says explicitly, so I know that you'll like kill Reds and stuff later, right? Part of their function was anti-communist.
But it's just, this way that there's no way to have a population that is prepared for war that is not also like insanely cruel and casual with. I mean, they're not killing a person, but you can see on the faces of all this family, like there's children who love this dog, and if we're
also, it's like your dad's gone. Homeland, it's like the dog is the one fucking thing you have left, right? It's like one, you're the fucking dad probably bought you the dog, right? So
his name's Goro. I don't know. We know Clint is an animal lover, so it's certainly not lost on him the evil of shooting a dog for the sake of proving a point.
I'm okay with this type of manipulation, even though it is very obviously because it's very obviously making us feel bad. Yeah, it happens, and we've talked about cops doing this, of course, constantly all the time. But
cops love shooting dogs; they can't get enough of it.
They can't stop shooting dogs. But also, it just is a reminder that there are just creatures, including humans, but I think it's made more obvious in animals, suffering all the time in war that are just not talked about. So even if talking about them is emotionally manipulative, I don't know if it's a reflection of reality. It should be
emotionally. The other guys are emotionally manipulating too.
Yeah.
I would like to bring up the way this is filmed. Like, I think, because I was watching it this time, and I thought to myself, like, oh, this is an example of the way that Clint shoots things and composes his scenes as opposed to other filmmakers. I think, like, a lesser filmmaker, and you guys know exactly what I'm going to talk about, in that scene where he goes in the back to shoot the dog, what we would have gotten in some fucking schmuck's hands is like a scene where it's like, okay, he's about to do it, and then we get a cutaway, and then a loud noise happens. And we don't know, and then he walks out, and then we're kind of like, oh, but did he though? And like then we cut back, and like the dog's still there or whatever. Now, what I love that Clint does is very simple and effective, is that he shows Shizumu making the decision. Like, we see him fire into the air. We don't cut away from him, right? And so, like, we watch him draw the gun and actively do this, right? And then we go, and then like he tries to go back with his superior officer, and then the dog barks, and like the whole thing is revealed, and then we focus on his face as his superior officer goes and does what he couldn't do. And to me, it's like that's what Clint's style is. He's interested in the great classical tradition of American cinema. He's a filmmaker of action, right? But it's not just about like the vulgar notion of what action is. He's talking about what a person's action is in whatever circumstance they're a part of. So he's not trying to do this kind of Hitchcockian, like, oh, but I'm going to leave you in suspense and I'm going to control and try to manage your feelings. He's not doing that. He's going to like, no, here's what's happening. I'm going to show you. I'm not going to look away. And I'm going to make you understand what the emotions of the person who's actually being forced to do this with. Like, it's not about the filmmaking manipulative apparatus. Because like conceptually, yes, you guys are right. Like, it could be seen as a manipulative thing, but the way that it's filmed, I think, is exactly why it isn't, is because Clint refuses to do this, this very like, again, like a typical Hollywood way of managing tone, where you're like, oh, well, obviously the thing is we want to wring every single bit of suspense from every scene, right? It's not overmanaged, it's not overly conceptualized, and I love that Clint just he's a filmmaker of the very apparent and of the very pragmatic choices that people make when given whatever situation that they're in, and this is a great example of that.
And at all times, like you're saying, you beautifully put that somebody on screen, we are sharing their experience, right? Which I think the other moment of animal suffering here is when the horse dies, and we experience it entirely through Berenishi's view, right? Which is not to see the horse exploded by a bomb in some horrific way, but nor is it the point. Yeah, but nor is it the too gentle, like, oh, we hear that his horse has died. No, we see him, realize a few seconds after the first like big air raid that he wants to go check on the horse. The horse is very awfully mangled. And I also think we get this in the titular letters from Iwo Jima, because this is, to me, far superior to last week's, or for us last week recording this episode, but $1 Million Baby, where you have a narration that is not an expression of anybody's feelings necessarily, right?
Yeah.
It's something that is instructive to the audience, basically.
Let me tell you about what happened during the movie $1 Million Baby.
Yeah, but the letters, I love the first letter, and I know this is taken from the general's real letter, so it's just a good use of source material, but he's talking about like wishing that he had fixed the draft in the kitchen before he left, and he gives extremely explicit instructions so his son can fix it. Yeah. And that is how people communicate, right? He also is sometimes talking about the war, or Saigo is talking about the war in his letter. So it's not like we never get their views on what's happening, but we get their views as they're choosing to express them to other people, which is always going to be like managed or, filtered through their expectations or desires or whatever. So that's infinitely more interesting to me than, like you're saying, something that is like a conversation between the filmmaker and the audience that has like cut out the middleman of the people experiencing what we're talking about.
Yeah, like it's profoundly unintellectualized, which is like something I very much enjoy, because I think like a lot of the worst features of the American cinema and like a post-Hitchcock world have become, it's not, your job isn't, as someone working in Hollywood, like your job doesn't become to tell a story or to create a situation to create empathy, right? Instead, your job is to manage audience expectation and try to like over predict what someone should or shouldn't be feeling given a certain scenario. And I think like that is the kind of bullshit that leads to like what we have now, where everything is about like, but did you not see that coming? And here's this twist, and everything has to be so contrived in a certain way because the filmmaker's trying to outsmart the audience in a like whatever way. And I think like that to me is just, I mean, I think for some stories, sure, but like in a story like this, like that would just totally kill this story. Like if every single thing in this movie was, like you were just like, oh my God, is, like you're not left in suspense when someone dies. Like people just die in this movie, and it's filmed in such a brutal and unflinching way that you're like, okay, well, that happened. And there's no, like, Clint isn't interested in being like, all right, and then here's the moment where you're supposed to feel empathy. He's like, nope, this is what this is. And I just think like his approach is so delicately simple. It's just like, I don't know, like as a director, like I really have nothing but admiration for the way that he approaches what he does, because I think he respects the intelligence of the audience too much to really like try and like make them feel something that they aren't. And because of that, right, he's able to tell this story about, you know, what is supposed to be like, you know, quote unquote, you know, foreign, you know, enemy culture in this type of genre. And he's able to just say, okay, well, we're just not going to do any of the usual bullshit. And this is going to be a story. It's an episodic story where almost all the characters die. And the ones that do survive are not the ones you expect. And it's like, okay, well, you know, like there's like, it's not trying to, it's not trying to like be too much of a genre piece. He's more interested in like, yeah, like the humanity.
Beautifully put. And I think it's a pretty good place to come to the end of our thoughts here on Letters from Iwo Jima, outside of any stray observations either of you might have. Did want to point out Ryo Kase, who plays Shimizu, and Nakamura Shido, who plays the guy with the landmines around his neck. And I think a couple other members of this cast are in the most recent Takeshi Kitano film, KUBI. Excited to see them in KUBI whenever I get to see KUBI. And I think I found once a grainy photo of Takeshi and Clint standing uncomfortably together. A wonderful document. Any last thoughts from either of you before we close things up?
I mean, so you took that photo, right? Like you're,
I mean in his heart.
Yeah, in my heart, I did. I was like 8 when it was taken, I believe. But good to have.
I'm very proud of you for being at that age, being such a good photographer.
Thank you so much. Very kind of you. Ian, last thoughts?
I just a few things. So just building off what Yui was saying, that just because you can never quite predict what the maestro is going to do, he does have a bit of like Ozu style elision out of nowhere, where Saigo's best friend in the troop dies of the aforementioned dysentery, and we don't really figure it out until Shimizu comes and tries to like take his bedroll spot. And I mean, there's a suggestion of it because he's saying like, "Oh, I have to go shit, my stomach really hurts" or something. But
yeah,
it just seems like, you know, like you're saying, because most of the deaths in here are shown, but given like an inconsequential quality to them, it's also cool that sometimes he's just saying it's so inconsequential that the cruelty of it is that it gets like no fanfare, it gets zero attention. Right?
I mean, and later they have that where they're trying to run past the graveyard, you know, and like charge the enemy, and it's like you can't help but note, it's like, okay, how many of those graves are these soldiers, you know, and how many from the islands, right? And like you're in the imminent presence of mortality constantly. Like, when he's laying among the dead bodies with the landmine strapped to his chest, it's like, all right, you're surrounded by decay, and like I mean, this place is a form of hell, and you're not ever unaware of that. There's never kind of like what I like about the episodic structure is that there's never like the downtime moment. It's like there's a kind of almost like a flatness of tone where it's like a background ambient anxiety of what's going on. And so you can never quite like watch a scene and be like totally relaxed, because you're like, well, some shit could just, you never know what kind of scene this is. Like the whole, like the cavern could collapse or something. You know, like Clint does a good job of making the cinematic space full of possibility, and not this, like, even though he's dealing with a narrow confined space throughout most of this film, it never feels as like, how do I put it? Like it's not a space that ever feels like home. You always feel as uncomfortable as the soldiers are being in the cave.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally. I do want to one more casting note. Well, two. I like very much that basically no one recurs between the two films. There's one actor, Alessandro something. He plays one of the flamethrower guys. But basically we don't get any overlap, and I think that's effective for all the reasons that you pointed out, Yui. Like modern filmmakers so often are more concerned with how information is going to be doled out than with what the information might actually be. And that would, I think, maybe just become like an Easter egg.
Yes.
Bullshit.
Oh yeah.
And then also, you know, you think about how the American soldiers in Flags of Our Fathers and the Japanese soldiers in Letters from Iwo Jima would not recognize one another. They would be sort of unplaceable faces. And so it makes sense that we can't figure out if any of these guys happen to encounter one another because they wouldn't know either, you know. And also just want to shout out that Clint Eastwood seems to have invented Mad Men. We've got Mark Moses, Duck Phillips as the American officer in the flashback in this film. In Flags of Our Fathers, we've of course got John Slattery. Mm-hmm. Is there anybody else?
Don't know, but you're right that the particular Duck Phillips flashback is extremely Mad Men in terms of there's like Duck. Little wry and then and stuff.
Of course, Roger Sterling on Mad Men is like a insane bigot against the Japanese because he fought in World War II. So,
all right. Well, I'd also like to just give a little Japanese security defense force epilogue here, where, of course, after the war, I think it's beautiful and wonderful, and we should all aspire to this. The general populace hated soldiers, basically, and they used to throw rocks at them and call them tax thieves, which is a wonderful way to characterize the military industrial complex. They are tax thieves. And then they started doing like a lot of civil engineering projects, which in theory sounds very good. They were doing like disaster relief and road construction and irrigation. But then, of course, very recently, the long-standing constitutional policy that forbade the Japanese from like developing any kind of aggression policy or having like buying war weapons that weren't just for defense was basically overturned or extremely weakened in 2014. And you mentioned the comfort women, Jake. Shinzo Abe basically like made a deal so that Korea would have to stop talking about comfort women. They paid $8 million in reparations and said, you cannot mention this publicly ever again, which is very, very strange.
Beautifully put, Ian. Thank you so much. I heard every word of it. Yui, if folks want to find out more of your work, find more of your writing, where should they look?
Yeah, just hit me up on Letterboxd at Comrade Yui. Same thing on Twitter. And then I got a Patreon and a YouTube channel where I record like full-length audio commentaries for movies that I'm obsessed with. So if you want to hear me talk about, I don't know, Public Enemies, I should have that
Blade
up
Runner.
in like a couple days. Yeah, Blade Runner 2.
Sweet. Sounds great.
I mean, I only talk about movies made by men, by the way. Like, that's my whole thing. Like, I'm just... That's my prerogative.
Unfortunately, same here. Sort of by
but you talk about the best men, you know, the man's man.
Yes, the best exotic marigold men. Ian, thank you for being on the show.
I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I had a great time.
As much as you'll allow me to be. But thank you, Yui, more importantly.
Do you mean... Okay, anyway. Yeah, thanks, Yui. This was a blast.
Hold on. I got this box of grenades here, guys. I don't know if
now we're talking.
You wanted to join me for something.
Come on.
Folks, we are...
three's a crowd.
Long live Clint Eastwood. We're all going out. We'll meet you on the other side, folks.
Smoke him if you got him.
Exactly. Speaking of which, next week we are talking Changeling. So join us then. You want to watch Changeling ahead of that episode, go ahead and pop right on over to basically the same places as always, or Stars. Your uncle probably has Stars. Ian, if folks want to watch Changeling down there in Mexico, what's up for those guys?
Well, for rent, it's available just all over the place. But if they want to find it with a subscription, let me see, because it was showing me the United States. Well, it's available on Max, like so many of these Eastwood Warner Brothers pictures. It's also available on Google Play, Microsoft, Claro Video, Amazon, and Apple TV.
They call it Mozzana TV. Many people have pointed this out to us. They've been sending us emails.
Many people are saying.
Jake, how come you aren't saying this?
You guys still aren't tired of this bit, right? Like, you keep doing it? Like, is there a point where you will get tired of this?
Yui. Are you telling us that there's a possibility to escape from something we're tired of? Is that one of the options available?
I'm just saying, look, listen.
That's why Yui brought the grenades, dude.
Are you a man? Right. Do you have agency? You can do it. I believe in you.
Okay. Goodbye forever, everybody, I guess. I'm realizing.
Yeah. All right. Well, in that case, we're about to pull some pins, folks. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.